Sow it, grow it. Sow it, grow it. Hey, sow it, grow it. Sow it, grow it.
Welcome to our Sow It, Grow It series where we show y'all what we sow and how we grow it.
We are sowing onions, celery, and celeriac, and we're not only going to tell and show y'all what we're sowing, but we're also going to give y'all some information about how to sow these plants, how to grow them as the season continues on. And then we're throwing in a couple mini quizzes that y'all can answer along with us to test your knowledge. We got our notes, handy dandy notes right here because we got a lot of things to tell you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now for the materials, since we sow our seeds on our kitchen table and we want to keep it relatively clean, we laid down an indoor gardening mat to contain any mess that may spill out on the table. You can fold it up, but we kept it flat to give us easier access to our other materials that we'll be using. Now, we like to use Jiffy seed starting mix because it contains materials that help with nutrient balance, drainage, and moisture retention. But use whatever you prefer as long as it's lightweight, porous, and well draining. Since seed starting mixes lack nutrients the seedlings will need to grow at its best over time, we add worm castings to supply some organic matter to the mix. We went ahead and added our seed starting mix and worm castings to our pans, and as suggested by one of our viewers, thank you, you know who you are, we also added boiling water. Now this method will kill off any larvae that may be hidden throughout the mixture and reduce the probability of having a fungus gnat infestation. Y'all, you do not want that. Here's a quick note to know just how much water to add to your mixture. So you want to add just enough to where you can mold it into a ball without water dripping from it, and you can still crumble it between your fingers. After we mixed up our mixture, we went ahead and added the mix to our 6-cell trays. We usually use the smaller ones for our seeds, but we use these larger ones for our onions specifically because that's primarily where they'll be staying before getting kicked out of the house. Of course, we got to get our labels because we will not remember the names of what we planted otherwise. We use tape because it is much easier to use than the white labels. We typically use those labels outdoors in our garden beds, in our containers. And we write the plant type and the variety of the plant with a permanent garden marker. Of course, we got our seeds ready to go because we can't sow seeds indoors without our seeds, right? And we have our water bottle or our spray bottle to keep our seeds moistened to help with germination. And we got to get our cling wrap out because that is what we use to cover our seeds to help insulate the heat and humidity that's emitted onto our seeds from the heat mat that we use, which helps with speeding up the rate of germination. And lastly, we have our notebook to keep track of when we sowed our seeds. Now let's get into the plants. We are going to start with onions. Now I'm going to give y'all an overview on when and how to sow your onions indoors, and then what the best soil conditions are for when you're growing your plants. Now, onions can take anywhere between 90 to 150 days to mature from seed. So it really is highly dependent on what variety you're growing, whether that's short day, long day, or intermediate day onions. And my mother dearest here will give you more information about those 3 types later on. But let's say you're trying to sow onions, you're trying to start onions from seed, right? When in the world do you start onions from seed indoors? Now, typically you want to sow them about 10 to 12 weeks before your last frost date. 2.5 to 3 months may sound like a wide stretch of time to sow your onions indoors, but this allows your onions plenty enough time to firstly germinate and then also to have enough time to grow tall enough, mature well enough before you transplant them outdoors. Notice that I did say from your last frost date, keyword your. So how in the world, if you've never grown onions before, you're maybe how in the world do I know what my last frost date is? Well, if you're in the United States, then you can go to the Old Farmer's Almanac website and you can put in your region and find your first and last frost dates for the growing seasons. And then in some areas, at least if not all areas in the United States, you can go to your local county extension website or office and also find your first and last frost dates for the growing seasons. And with a local county extension, you can also find your growing zone for your specific area, and sometimes also what plants and varieties of those plants grow best for your area. So it's been 10 to 12 weeks since you sown those onion seeds indoors, and they become seedlings now, and it's time to root them and boot them up out your home so they can become adults. They are on their own now. So we have to disclaim that onions are picky when it comes to their growing conditions. First of all, they absolutely love water. So you want to make sure you have a proper and consistent watering schedule for your onions. And then also, they like a certain type of soil. So first of all, get all the manure, compost, and organic matter you can find and put that in your garden beds, your grow bags, your containers, or if you're growing it in ground, like we're going to experiment with this year, you want to mix that organic matter with your native soil because onions love fertile soil, okay? And you also want to make sure that your soil medium is fairly loose. If you have a heavier soil medium, like something that's primarily clay, then that may be too heavy and dense and compacted to where it'll prevent your onions from forming a proper bulb or a larger sized bulb. So if you do have heavy clay soil and you're trying to grow in ground, then what you can do is give it the proper amendments with some compost and then also add some sand in there so it can loosen your soil medium. And notice I did say onions absolutely love water, in which they do.
They do.
But they don't they don't love water that much to where you got to continuously drown them. And the water has absolutely nowhere to exit. So make sure your soil is also well draining. If you have an excessive amount of water and the water can't go anywhere, it can't drain off, then that can lead to what's called root rot and lead to other types of diseases, which you don't want because we're trying to harvest these onions to eat, all right? And you also want to make sure that your soil has a pH around 6 to 6.8 or 6 to 7, which is slightly acidic so that it can form the proper leaves and bulbs. Now, with those growing conditions in mind, let's talk about the actual seeds, sowing your seeds indoors. We are sowing 4 different types of varieties this year. We got 4 of them, okay? We are sowing Riverside onions, Texas grano onions, red Cipinelli or Cipinelli red onions, and then Australian brown. So when we're sowing onions or any type of seeds, we like to look at the back of the seed packets because that gives us a lot of information that's very important in the growing season. One piece of information that is extremely important is your seed depth. With onions, you typically sow them about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch deep in your soil seed starting mix. So 1/4 of an inch is what we typically do, and that's just like a light covering of seed starting mix on top. And unlike some other seeds, which we will mention one of those in this video, you do not want, you can, you can, all right? But you do not have to supply light to onions in order for them to germinate. But you do need to give it constant moisture. So grab your little spray bottle or your water bottle with some holes at the top and make sure that you are moistening these seeds, these onion seeds, and the seedlings so that they can grow and germinate properly.
All right, y'all. Now, if y'all are growing bulbing onions from seed, you want to make sure you get the appropriate varieties that match the day length for the area that you live in. Because if you don't, you could risk the fact that your bulb may not bulb to its fullest potential. And that's because light plays a major role in the formation of the bulb. So as soon as the days reach a certain amount of sunlight for the area that you live in, what's going to happen is your onion is going to shift gears. And switch the energy from growing leaves to putting that energy into growing a bulb.
The bulb, yeah.
That's what's going to happen. And so that's where leaf formation becomes really important. So think about it this way. Each one of those leaves creates an outer layer or a ring around the bulb. So the bigger the leaves or the more leaves you have, the bigger the bulb. All right, now let's take this a little bit further. There are 3 groups of onions: long day varieties, intermediate day, also known as day neutral varieties, and short day varieties. Now, long day varieties require 14 or more hours of sunlight for onions to initiate the bulbing. The intermediate or day neutral onions, 12 to 14 hours of sunlight to initiate bulbing, and short day varieties, 10 to 12 hours of sunlight to initiate bulbing. Now, we live in Tennessee, and so we straddle that line to where we can grow intermediate day or short day onions. So what would happen is if we grew long day varieties,
what's gonna happen, y'all?
Our onions are gonna look at us like we crazy and like,
what's going on?
Where the sun at? Where the sun? Because we typically in our summers get about 12 hours of daylight. So with those long day varieties requiring 14 hours of sunlight to initiate bulbing, what's going to happen is we just going to be eating those onions for the green tops. Or we may get really small bulbing onions. And conversely, like our northern friends, if you all grow short day onions, because y'all have long summers with 14 or more hours of sunlight, and with short day varieties requiring only 10 to 12 hours of sunlight to initiate bulbing, your onions may initiate that bulbing process too soon, which would result in smaller bulbs. So it's really important to make sure you choose a variety that meets the appropriate day length for the area that you live in. Keep that in mind.
Quiz time! Welcome to the Sow It, Grow It mini game show. I'm your host, Kira, and we have our contestant, Kay. She's very excited here. We also have you guys here at home, and we're going to ask everybody a question. Are you ready for the question?
I stay ready.
All right, so question is, how can you prevent your eyes from watering when cutting onions? Is it A, chill the onion in the fridge before cutting? B, use a dull knife? C, cut the onion under running water? Or D, nothing except your fate? Okay, Kay, what's your answer?
E, close my eyes.
All right, y'all, we got a new spread laid out on the table. This is celery and celeriac. Now, what in the world is celeriac? So celeriac is it's a root crop that's a part of the celery family.
Now, every year, y'all, we try to grow something different, and celeriac is definitely our something different. Y'all, we don't know anything about this plant other than what was on the seed pack.
We don't know Nathan pretty much. But it's always great to try new things. So when it comes to celery and celeriac, they have pretty much the same kind of conditions when you sow them and when you grow them. So when do you start your celery and celeriac seedlings? Now, when I was finding this information, there was a wide range at which you sow your seeds before your last frost date, which was somewhat conflicting. So I saw that you can sow them between 6 to 14 weeks before your last frost date, but 6 weeks is really, really pushing it because celery and celeriac, they require a long growing season and they can take a while to germinate for some people. So the best time to sow your celery and celeriac seedlings would be at least 10 weeks before your last frost date. So that's what we're doing. We are sowing them at least 10 weeks before our last frost date, or what we think is our last frost date, y'all.
So depending upon what we read, our last frost date could be April 7th or April 21st. So we toss those dates, both of them in the air, and then we pick April 7th.
Yeah, so that's the one we're going with. That's a wide range, but we are going with April 7th. So we are going to transplant our celery and celeriac seedlings about 1 week after April 7th. So that will be about April 14th when we should expect to transplant them outdoors. Now, the soil conditions, the pH, the watering, that's pretty much all the same as with onions. They're picky, they love water, so make sure that your celery and celeriac are well watered, have a proper watering routine. And then with the soil, pretty much the same exact thing. Loves fertile soil with plenty of organic matter, is well draining to get rid of some of that excess water. And then also loose soil, because celery, although it does not grow underground like with onion bulbs, they have thin roots, so you don't want some heavy compacted soil over top of the roots of that celery plant. And then also it likes a pH between, it's slightly acidic, between 6 and 7.
Now, some people find celery hard to germinate from seed. Now, with celery and celeriac, they need light to germinate. So you want to surface sow those seeds. You don't want to cover them. Surface sow, press them into the soil, give them light. Now, another thing we found out is that you want to keep the soil moist. You want to try not to let it dry out. Keep the soil moist. And then thirdly, what you want to do, you may need to give it some warmth. So that's warmth from a sunny windowsill, or the warmth from grow lights, or warmth from a grow mat, a heat mat.
It's all the same. We like to use heat mats because they're very convenient, and we have a couple of them, and it just really helps speed along the germination rates, not just for celery, but a lot of our seedlings. So sometimes they'll pop up like next day. So get you a heat mat if you want to. It's quiz time, and we have our next participant, Kay, as in K-A-Y. Come on in, Kay. How you doing today?
I'm well, and you?
I'm good. You ready for this question?
Yes, I am.
Are y'all ready? All right. What is the typical planting depth for celery seeds? Is it A, 1 inch, B, a ½ inch, C, don't know, I'm doing my own thing, or D, 1/8 of an inch? Okay, Miss K-A-Y, are you ready?
Honey, I've been ready.
Oh, okay then. So what's your answer? A, B, C, or D?
Honey, I don't know. I just do my own thing.
Okay, y'all, you can do that, but the correct answer is D, 1/8 of an inch. Last quiz time, y'all. We got K with the K-A-E. Okay, K.
What's going on, y'all?
I see you got some books here.
All the answers.
All right, now you ready, Kay, for this question?
You already know.
All right, so your question is, celeriac is also known by which other name? And y'all answer this too. Is it A, ball celery, B, celery root, C, carrot root celery, or D, I don't even know what that is? Okay, Miss K-A-E, what's your answer? Is it A, B?
Man, I don't even know.
So that is it for our first installment of our Sow It, Grow It series, y'all. This is really fun to make. We got plenty more seeds we'll be sowing, so we'll be having more Sow It, Grow It episodes in store, so be on the lookout for those.
Let us know in the comments what y'all are planning on sowing and growing. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And as always, plant to live, y'all.
See ya.
See ya.
Sow it, grow it. Sow it, grow it. Hey, sow it, grow it. Sow it, grow it.